She absolutely declined to provide mere synopses, avoided any rephrasing, and refused to selectively trim a single phrase. Instead, she produced a physical copy of every single public utterance Pete Hegseth made between 2014 and 2020 concerning Armed Forces Command, civilian administrative oversight, and the ethical benchmarks he explicitly demanded a defense secretary must satisfy. Representative Maggie Goodlander placed the document stack onto her table, consisting of 47 single-spaced sheets that she had scrutinized in their entirety, actively illuminating the pertinent passages with a yellow marker. The pages were saturated with those yellow highlights. She fixed her gaze upon Hegseth sitting across the hearing room and delivered 7 distinct words that prompted his principal legal counsel to instantly grab his writing pad before she even completed her sentence. I'm going to quote you directly. If you are unfamiliar with the Homeless People channel, ensure you subscribe immediately, because the strategy Goodlander is preparing to execute appears deceivingly basic yet proves utterly catastrophic. She has absolutely no intention of leveling accusations against Hegseth, nor will she attempt to define his behavior or provide her own personal analysis regarding his choices. She is simply going to recite his own exact phrasing from 2016 back to him, and subsequently she will demonstrate to the entire panel exactly how massive the chasm has become between the individual currently occupying the witness chair and the man who initially voiced those convictions. Inside House Armed Services Committee Room 218 on a Thursday morning at precisely 10:38 Eastern Time, the session was officially scheduled as a review concerning Department of Defense leadership standards and civilian oversight accountability, yet the proceedings were anything but standard. Goodlander entered the space appearing more youthful than practically anyone else present, operating as a freshman legislator from New Hampshire with a background as a national security attorney. She lacks nearly 3 decades of tenure on this panel. She possesses 0 combat deployment experience, and she arrived without a portfolio stuffed with top-secret dossiers that were declassified a mere 48 hours prior. What she does possess, however, is an investigative squad that dedicated a full 6 weeks to combing through every single public declaration Pete Hegseth ever issued, covering every Fox News segment, every published manuscript, every audio broadcast, every opinion piece, every social media post, and every formal address, resulting in those 47 yellow highlighted pages. Hegseth remained completely oblivious that this extensive research had been conducted, although he certainly should have anticipated it. The initial 44 minutes of the inquiry proceeded conventionally, focusing on financial allocations, staffing issues, and combat preparedness, during which Hegseth provided his usual measured and highly professional responses. He had navigated this specific committee environment numerous times previously, understood its natural cadence, and appeared visibly relaxed. Then Goodlander grasped the audio equipment, and her vocal tone was impeccably precise and incredibly serene, embodying the specific tranquility of an individual who has prepared so obsessively that absolutely nothing transpiring over the ensuing half-hour could possibly catch her off guard. She stated her desire to commence with a passage he authored within his 2016 publication on the very first page, quoting verbatim that a defense secretary must prioritize absolute honesty with the American public above all else, completely rejecting strategic or selective truthfulness, because the personnel serving beneath his command merit nothing less than total transparency regarding the choices finalized on their behalf. She raised her eyes, reminding the secretary that this specific benchmark represents his own standard, articulated in his own vocabulary, pulled directly from his own manuscript, before inquiring if he currently upholds that conviction. Hegseth adjusted his posture slightly, affirming his belief regarding the necessity of transparency and accountability within defense leadership. "Good," she replied, unsealing her portfolio to introduce her first document, which he positioned beneath the visual projector, describing it as an aggregation of his public declarations issued between January and May of the current year concerning the casualty statistics from the Iran conflict. She noted 11 distinct instances spanning television broadcasts, media briefings, and legislative testimony, emphasizing that in every single occurrence he publicly asserted that American combat losses in the Iran war totaled exactly 13 fatalities and 47 wounded personnel. She elevated her gaze, reiterating the figures of 13 deceased and 47 injured, confirming that this remained his unwavering public statistic. Hegseth bobbed his head in agreement, asserting that those numbers accurately mirror the officially sanctioned Defense Department casualty report cleared for public dissemination. She extracted a second record, identifying it as the classified Defense Department casualty registry concerning the Iran conflict, which was surrendered to satisfy a legally binding congressional summons and subsequently declassified expressly for this hearing a mere 48 hours ago. She flipped to a mark sheet, reading that according to this internal registry, American combat losses stemming from the Iran war, accurate up to the 30th of April, actually total 31 fatalities alongside 94 wounded individuals. She placed the document down, emphasizing the discrepancy, 31 deceased rather than 13, and 94 injured rather than 47, representing a figure that more than doubles his publicly stated totals in both categories. The chamber descended into absolute stillness. It was not a slow fade into quiet, but an instantaneous hush, representing the specific type of silence that materializes when a jarring statistic is introduced into a space and everyone present simultaneously comprehends its severe implications. 31 fatalities instead of 13 meant every journalist in attendance performed identical mental arithmetic at exactly the same moment, just as every relative of a service member seated in the spectator gallery did. The disparity separating those two statistics does not represent a minor mathematical rounding error. It equates to 18 human beings, 18 memorial services, and 18 folded flags presented to grieving loved ones. Goodlander refused to pause her momentum, but I must halt momentarily to urge viewers who believe every single American household that lost a family member in this conflict deserves proper recognition to smash the engagement button immediately. The boost feature is located adjacent to the standard approval icon and is available for free 3 times daily, giving us exactly 7 days to propel this broadcast into the highest echelon of trending platform content where every interaction genuinely matters. Execute that action now and then continue viewing, because Goodlander possesses 3 additional records, with the final piece of evidence containing an internal memorandum explicitly detailing exactly why the publicly released figures were intentionally slashed in half. Hegseth tilted his torso forward, arguing to the representative that casualty statistics involve intricate classification protocols tied closely to operational security, suggesting that certain casualties might remain classified at a tier that fundamentally prohibits their inclusion within publicly available reports. Goodlander elevated her palm to halt him, asserting her firm understanding regarding classification protocols before grasping her third document, which she identified as the current iteration of the Defense Department's casualty reporting guidelines. She opened it to a marked passage, reading that according to the agency's own internal rules, combat casualties may only be withheld from public disclosure under 2 highly specific conditions. Firstly, if the operation during which the loss occurred remains classified at a compartmented security level, and secondly, if public revelation would actively jeopardize ongoing military maneuvers. She raised her eyes, boldly declaring that neither of those 2 conditions applies to the 18 supplementary fatalities and 47 additional wounded personnel detailed within the internal registry, as they sustained their injuries and lost their lives during operations that have already received public acknowledgement. Their deaths lack classification, their injuries remain unclassified, and they simply remain completely excluded from the official public tally. She placed the document down, reminding the secretary that he penned a statement in 2016 demanding absolute honesty from a defense secretary because the serving men and women merit nothing less than total truth regarding decisions finalized on their behalf. She expressed her intention to question him regarding 18 specific individuals, those exact 18 personnel killed in combat whose families have yet to witness their sons and daughters officially counted within his public casualty statistics, noting that these cases are neither classified nor operationally sensitive, but merely ignored. She paused briefly, stating that these grieving families are fully aware their loved ones remain absent from his figures. They have relentlessly contacted legislative offices, they have reached out to veteran advocacy groups, they have dispatched physical correspondence, and they have personally arrived at Defense Department public affairs facilities carrying verifying documentation, deployment mandates, death certificates, and comprehensive proof confirming their family member was present, was documented by the armed forces, yet remains entirely uncounted within his public declarations. They possess the knowledge that their loved one participated, they know their loved one failed to return, and they are acutely aware that his public tally completely omits them. Several of these families have awaited an explanation for 4 solid months. They will certainly not receive one from a press liaison, but they are absolutely guaranteed to receive one today. Hegseth's facial expression transformed, completely lacking anger or pallor, settling instead into something noticeably quieter and significantly harder to decipher. It was the distinct visage of an individual who never anticipated the dialogue veering into this territory and entirely lacked a pre-formulated response for this exact variation of the inquiry. He addressed the representative, claiming he regards the accurate accounting of every service member's ultimate sacrifice with extreme seriousness, and asserting that if discrepancies exist between classified and unclassified reporting, his department actively investigates them. Goodlander positioned a 4th document beneath the visual projector, identifying it as an internal Defense Department communications memorandum dated March 11th and generated directly from his own office. She opened it and read from a senior communications official who explicitly recommended maintaining the public casualty figure at 13 killed in action for the time being, arguing that releasing the full total would generate messaging complications right before the pending supplementary budget request. She paused, reading the memo, highlighting the official's suggestion to revisit the disclosure timeline only after the legislative budget vote concluded. She elevated her gaze, repeating the phrase regarding messaging complications prior to a budget request, emphasizing that this specific rationale, provided directly within a memo originating from his own office, served as the sole justification for concealing 18 deceased Americans from the official public casualty tally, completely devoid of any classification or operational security concerns. She grasped the 47-page printout, flipping to an illuminated segment to remind the secretary of another statement he authored in 2016. She recited his words, stating that the most egregious action any defense official can commit is treating the ultimate sacrifice of service members as a manipulatable variable designed for political convenience. Those lost lives do not represent variables, those fatalities do not serve as rhetorical talking points. Every individual name requires accounting, every grieving family demands the absolute truth, and this standard is not a mere option but rather the absolute minimum baseline. She set the text down, reiterating his own 2016 phrasing demanding that every name be counted and every family be told the truth as a mandatory minimum requirement. She stared directly at Hegseth, stating firmly that 18 names remain uncounted within his public statistics, and 18 families have been denied the comprehensive truth via his public statements, meaning that according to the exact standard established within his own manuscript, his actions fail to meet the mandatory minimum and constitute a total collapse of the most fundamental obligation he previously outlined. She pivoted toward the committee leader, formally requesting to submit the classified casualty registry, the casualty reporting guidelines, and the March 11th communications memorandum straight into the permanent legislative archive. She further requested a formal referral to the Department of Justice demanding a criminal inquiry into potential infractions concerning 10 U.S.C. 1489, which mandates accurate casualty reporting, alongside 18 U.S.C. 1001, regarding the submission of false statements to Congress. She finally proposed that the families belonging to all 31 service members who perished during the Iran War receive official notification confirming their loved ones' permanent inclusion within the official Congressional archive, entirely regardless of their omission from prior public declarations. All 3 legislative proposals received instantaneous backing and were swiftly approved by the panel. Goodlander collected her various pieces of evidence, grasped the 47-page printout, held it aloft momentarily, and subsequently returned it to her table. She directed her gaze at Hegseth for a concluding moment, reminding the secretary that she is a freshman on this panel, lacking nearly 3 decades of tenure and possessing 0 combat deployments, but emphasizing that she utilized her time over 6 weeks to meticulously read every single public statement he ever made concerning the exact type of defense leader he intended to become. She confessed that she genuinely believed he meant those words and suspected a fragment of him still does. She paused, noting that this exact reality renders the March 11th memorandum significantly more difficult to justify rather than easier. Citing messaging complications to obscure 18 deceased Americans falls drastically short of the minimum standard established by his own words within his own book, completely failing to even approach that baseline. She turned away from the witness, subscribed to the Homeless People channel immediately, because tomorrow we will publicly release the names of the 18 service members killed during the Iran war whose identities are explicitly not classified and lack any operational sensitivity, yet remain confined to the classified casualty registry while being entirely absent from any public Defense Department statement. Their families are now aware, and the rest of the nation soon will be as well. The documents are entirely authentic. The registry belongs directly to his department. The legal summons was executed properly, and Pete Hegseth has just faced a formal referral to the Department of Justice for deliberately concealing 18 dead Americans from the public casualty tally simply due to messaging complications preceding a budget vote. According to his own exact words pulled from his own manuscript, every name requires accounting and every family must receive the truth, representing a mandatory minimum standard, not a voluntary option. Smash the approval icon and distribute this content globally to highlight the discrepancy of 13 publicly acknowledged fatalities versus 31 within the actual registry, exposing 18 missing names tied to a single memo citing messaging complications, all while the author who demanded every name be counted merely sat in absolute silence as a freshman legislator recited his own words directly back to him.